Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You've got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show. This is Greg coming at you from the ITP, the International Teacher Podcast, once again. And with me is JP. How you doing, JP?
Good morning from Mexico. It seems like it's always morning over here.
Well, it is always morning. I don't know why we do that. It's a timing thing, JP. It's a timing thing.
It works out perfectly. I rolled out of bed, made my coffee. You saw me eating my peanut butter toast right on air. And now we are ready to greet somebody on the other side of the world in Thailand, Peter Pagett.
Hey guys. Yeah, you're talking about just rolling out of bed. I'm about to, well, I would say roll into bed, but we're on Chinese New Year holiday, so I'll probably roll out somewhere else.
That's a very good point. Happy Chinese New Year, everybody. The Year of the Dragon. That was back, I think it was a couple days back, right? It was the official day.
Yeah, a couple of days ago. Happy Lunar New Year for the other parts of the world that celebrate in their own different ways as well.
So where are you right now while you're talking with us, Peter?
So I'm in Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai was my first international gig some 11 years ago.
Thailand,
and yep, Chiang Mai in Thailand. Thank you. After that, I've been coming back. I had to stop myself coming back as often as I did because it's a really beautiful place. I don't know if you guys have ever been, but it's just such a nice mix of you can just relax here, or you can be a bit crazy, or the only thing it misses is a beach. And for some people that can be a bit of crosses it off the list. Some people really need that.
Because Chiang Mai is up in the northern parts in the highlands, and you're just visiting there now, and you're on vacation for Chinese New Year. Where are you going on vacation from then? Where are you teaching or living right now?
Yep, so I'm based in Guangzhou. I'm working I just started this year at the American International School of Guangzhou.
Which is China, right?
In China, yeah. It's my fifth year there in the mainland. I was at two other international schools, also in Guangzhou, but in a different part, which is where I first met Jacqueline. And then, yeah.
Okay, wait a second. Let's go a little timeline here. I know you're anxious. My gosh, you two together. You're anxious. Peter, give us a little bit more from the beginning. Like, where are you originally from, and then how you got into international, and then work your way up a little bit.
Sure.
For that.
So I'm originally from Australia, which is where I started playing music. I'm a band teacher. I didn't even get to that part yet, did I? I started.
There's time.
I started playing trumpet and piano when I was in primary school there. As I was, playing and enjoying it, I got to. Oh, am I going too far back? I don't know. But
and then middle school on the second day in sixth grade.
But at one point, this all becomes important, I promise. It's like a Lord of the Rings movie, But at one point, I was like, I'm really enjoying music, and people are telling me I'm good at it. So let's go and study music, but I will never be a teacher. Ooh. So I ended up studying classical piano, did my undergrad. At the end of my undergrad, I was like, what am I going to do? Like, there's not much. You've got to be in that top 1% of performers, to really make it as a classical musician. And as good as I wasn't quite that good. And I'd been conducting a local community band. I'd been teaching studio music, like private one-on-one lessons. And so at the end of my undergrad, I was like, well, let's give this teaching thing a go. Went and did my 1 year of a grad dip ed, started doing, work in the public schools in Australia, studying in Brisbane and Queensland. Trying to get permanent work in Brisbane was really tricky. So I went to a more rural town called Childers, which for those of you that know Australia is not in the middle of nowhere, but it's a very small community, a community of about 3,000, as I remember when I was there. I did 3.5 years there, and still something was missing. I was enjoying it. The programs I had really grown, and we'd gotten some really wonderful results. But I'd eventually heard about this international teaching thing and started to research it some more.
Do you remember how you heard about it? Because I think we all know the beginnings of our story, but do you remember?
I think I have vague recollections of hearing about it briefly during my postgrad training, my teacher training, where we were talking about curriculum or the different types of schools. And they said, well, there's public schools, there's private schools, there's independent schools, And then there's international schools. And that was, I think, the first time I'd kind of, and of course, all of the little gossip, you hear little bits here and there otherwise. But during teacher training was when I was like, oh, and then they like never spoke about it again. They never, gave any more like information. And so in about my third year in Childers was when I was like, what was that international teaching thing? And started to dig around online, and probably the kind of reading the tea leaves and finding those little tidbits of information. Eventually, I got onto Search Associates. I think I'd seen like the TES kind of websites, those free websites, and I was like, no, that's too good to be true. That can't be. Or even the opposite, seeing in places like Thailand, seeing the very low pay rates and being like, that can't be right. Like, how can people live off
survive on that?
Yeah, like, and this is just like in Australia, you don't often get to travel much, especially I was only in my late 20s at that point, and hadn't been overseas except with family when I was very, very young. So hearing about people that were, spending a year backpacking around Thailand, I was like, God, that must be crazy expensive. And then, had a meeting with
Nick.
Had a meeting with Nick. He held an information session in Brisbane, which opened the world a little bit more. Went to a job fair and ended up with a job here in Chiang Mai. And that was 11 years ago.
Oh, so you've been out in the field, like out in international for 11 years.
Correct.
Going back to what you were talking about, when I wasn't even a teacher yet, and I hadn't even graduated, and I went to a job fair. I didn't know anything about international. I mean, the only thing I had ever heard about was like, hey, I'm going to find an Australian teacher through some company, and they're going to come and live in my house. I'm going to go live in their house, and I'll teach at their school. And they like an exchange thing. But I didn't have a house. So I was like, how does that work?
Do they want to live with my mom?
Yeah, live with my mom and dad, and live with my, whatever. But I didn't have any clue, and I didn't find out about it until by chance. And that's a long story, but it's very interesting that you just went right for Search Associates, because they're a big company that does a lot of great recruiting for people, and everybody knows Search, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you went out 11 years ago. And how long did you stay in Chiang Mai then?
So I did 1 year in Chiang Mai. There's a story behind that may or may not come up during our chat. And then ended up at a school in Macau, of all places, for 5 years.
Macau. Ooh.
Yep. Oh, I get goosebumps. That was like, it was such an interesting situation because of what had happened in Chiang Mai. I still had permanency actually back in Australia, so you can take something like 7 years leave without pay. So
7?
this was, right, exactly.
Americans can't do that.
Yeah,
No.
well, that's exactly what I was like. And my main school there was like, Peter, are you coming back? Are you coming back? So I had this 1 year in Chiang Mai, got this job in Macau, and it was like, this was a do or die kind of situation where if this school works out, I'll stay as long as I can. But if not, I'll go back to Australia and say goodbye to the whole international thing. And my school back in Australia was putting pressure on me. Peter, are you coming back or not? Because while you've got that permanency, they can't replace you with another permanent teacher. They can only offer casual contracts. So fortunately, the school in Macau Anglican College, was lovely. It's not for everyone. I did meet people that really, really struggled with Macau. It can be quite insular, but I think growing up in Australia and a lot of the smaller communities there kind of helped prepare me for that. And 5 years in Macau, and then decided it was time to try something new again. And wanted to get that gold ticket of the IB training. And so found a school in...
Because Macau was what curriculum?
Macau was British curriculum, the Cambridge curriculum. Actually, when I was there, the school had started Cambridge in general in secondary, but they hadn't introduced it as a music subject. And so I had this one lovely Indian student who went to the principal and said, we're really interested in music. We really this student in particular wanted to study music, but without IGCSE, AS and A levels to help them get into college, they were worried they weren't getting that, they were missing an opportunity. So I ended up for my first 2 years teaching Cambridge music on Saturdays with 3 very passionate and very committed students that made it really some lovely Saturdays. And I'm still in touch. That student, that Indian alumni, he's now finishing a postgrad in classical voice in the UK. We still talk pretty regularly. He'll message me, Mr. Pagett, can we do a concert together? When can you come to Macau? Lovely kid. Even when post-COVID, when everything opened up and I went back to Macau, I had another student reach out to me and say, Mr. Pagett, can we do lunch together? Had 10 alumni from Macau that many of them have gone on to study music, and it fills your heart. Like that just the memories that make it all worthwhile, you know?
I have a question that off the base a little bit here, but where is Macau? I just can't picture in my head without looking at a map. It's close. Is it the southern part of China,
Yeah,
off the coast?
You know where the Pearl River Delta is?
Okay.
And you know where Hong Kong is on one side?
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of the Pearl River Delta is Macau.
Okay. So I'm just trying to think of our listeners that don't know, and I'm just a little bit, I don't know much about China, and that's so huge over there. But Macau is one of those things you hear in James Bond movies and stuff, right? Right.
Well, I was
They're going to
watching
casinos.
Yeah, I was watching Now You See Me, Now You Don't, I think it was, and the sequel was in Macau. So I was watching going, oh, I know that, I know where that was.
Fantastic movie, yeah, both of them.
And it is, like Jacqueline just said, it's known as the Las Vegas of the East. And it just, even during COVID, I got stuck in mainland China during COVID. And even that 3 years came back to visit Macau, and there had been construction and growth, and it was...
Was it a good package, though? The school you were at, did you make enough to have a good life there? In Dubai, sometimes you can make good money, sometimes you can't because you're spending a lot. It's a Vegas atmosphere, right? Some of these schools that you live in cities where you don't make a lot, but the living is great. So what was it like to be in Macau?
I think I could have saved more. I probably lived too much.
Lifestyle, yeah.
Yeah. I know people that save a reasonable amount. And it was at one of the schools where you get the living allowance is just like part of your salary. And so some people choose to live. I chose to have like a smaller apartment closer to school. Some people chose a nicer apartment further away from school, spend a bit more, things like that. That it was nice to have that option. It wasn't like, here's the apartment you're going to live in, and we're going to take all of your...
you want the extra cash to buy some musical instruments or go to Chiang Mai again and visit and then go back. But that was Macau, huh? So you went Thailand or Chiang Mai, and then you went to Macau. How long were you there? How many
5 years in Macau.
Okay. Yeah. And after Macau?
Yep, on to thinking, again, like looking for some international baccalaureate experience. Found a school that was, did an online interview with the head of school there. Found a school in Guangzhou in the south of China. And it's not too far from Macau. I was thinking, just across the border, it won't be that big of a difference. And oh my gosh, it was very, I didn't know. I'd gone to mainland China a handful of times, and when you're just visiting, you don't kind of notice the differences. And especially where that school was, Guangzhou, and especially for many of your listeners, maybe don't realize this, is that Chinese cities are behemoths. You can travel where I was a 2-hour metro ride into the main part of Guangzhou. And so it was really very a local area, which kind of added to some of the challenges. But that's also what we sign up for as international teachers. It's not all going to be, roses and sunbeams. But that was my IB, cutting my teeth on the IB. And in my second year at that school, I got to meet wonderful Jacqueline over here.
Online.
It was online. That's what I was about.
Was it 3 months? Yeah.
It was
July to December. What's that? Like 4 months.
Yeah, because I remember I was back in Australia. I'd gotten stuck out of China at the start of COVID because it was during this Chinese New Year break that things started to become tricky. And so I stayed 6 months here in Chiang Mai during that time. And then as the visa situation got a little bit, again, insecure, I managed to fly back to Australia and spend 4 months at the wonderful age of 38 living with parents. But what was really fascinating about that was that my trip back was Chiang Mai to Bangkok, Bangkok to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Sydney. And Bangkok and Hong Kong were, two of the major airports in the world. And it was COVID time, and so they were just empty. Everything was closed. It was something you kind of watch or read about in those, zombie apocalypse kind of movies. And I had to and got to experience that. Like it was, I was walking around taking videos and photos, and you wouldn't read, well, you would read about it if it was a zombie apocalypse. But yeah, and then that was when Jacqueline and I first met. I got back into China after 10 months teaching online, did that second year at the IB school, and then moved on to another school, managing to get AP, or not AP experience, but American curriculum experience. That was at NCPA, at Nuncha College Preparatory Academy, and 2 years there. And now at
So
AISG.
Peter brings up a really good point. I just want our listeners to have an idea of all these curricula that Peter
Yep.
is throwing out. That with each move, if you can add something to your roster, and Peter is a great example of that because he started off with, what was it in Chiang Mai?
Chiang Mai was a mix. They had PYP, and then they had PYP, full stop, and then everything else was kind of more of an American system, and that was interesting. Just getting an understanding of that IB kind of philosophy there.
That's the elementary IB, yeah. The
Correct, yeah,
PYP,
primary years program,
year
yeah.
program,
But
yeah.
were you K to 12 music or
I
something?
was 2 to 12, yeah.
Whoa. Okay.
Yes, that was, and that really taught me I'm not an elementary music teacher. I respect like my elementary music teacher in Macau. Like I really respected and admired her because I was like, we had this really great program, I think that really grew, but she, she led the charge there. She laid the groundwork. And if you don't have that, I really learned that myself, where it's like, I don't want to teach beat for the next 45 minutes to second graders that just want to run around. So that, no.
You're talking to the choir
One,
with Greg.
Rest, 2, rest, 3, rest. Yeah, I know.
Meanwhile, they're just like, pew, 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 pew.
But yeah, so with each move to add something to your roster. So, with Macau, you got the British curriculum under your belt, and then you went to IB, and then you went to AP, and now are you back in AP? Are you with IB? Is it a mix?
IB now. AISG has just introduced the MYP, the middle years program, this year, and so they're now a full continuum school. I think to circle back though, Jacqueline, as well, because I've been reflecting on this quite a lot. I think it's also, or maybe even more so, moving with intentionality. I didn't just leave Macau because I wanted, and even for some people, this is another, like some people do move because they want to try a new location. One thing that Nick did really well with Search Associates, with the sort of the workshop that he held with that for new hires or new prospective teachers, was he explained that people go into international teaching for lots of different reasons. The packages can be amazing, the locations, the different curriculum, all of the above. I'm a bit more, if at the risk of sounding, big noting myself, I think I'm a bit more focused on the education aspect of it. I want to work in schools that really are rigorous and believe in what they're teaching and invest in their teachers and support that so that teachers can support students.
It also builds your resume too, right? Your resume will build up when you have IB, whether it's PYP, MYP, or IBO, anything like that. And then you have the British program and then the American program. When you walk into an interview now or a job fair, you really have the pick of the litter, and you're going to get a lot of invitations, not just because of how many years you've been teaching, but your variety of curricula that you've been teaching, right? And that's not something I ever had. When I was looking for my IB, I got hired at a school without even having any IB experience. I was very lucky. That's one way to get into an IB school. And that was difficult for me to switch modes. But after teaching PYP for a while, I really felt better about myself and my teaching professionally. I felt much better walking into an interview and knowing about the IB, and I wouldn't have to, cross off schools that were asking for it.
But I think as well, Greg, what you just touched on, you said about making the switch. And I think being able to explain or reflect on those, there is a difference, and there should be a difference between British curriculum and American curriculum and IB, and understanding what each of those are trying to achieve or want to achieve, and being able to speak to that and show that in what you've done. How have you shown that at your IB school as opposed to the British school, or vice versa? So you're not just making the switch. It's not just something that's on your resume. It's I've lived and breathed that, hopefully.
Then another thing that I know and I want to share with the listeners is that another reason for the moves were also leadership opportunities. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? The each of the moves.
Honestly, the most of the moves was because of the curriculum piece. And even at the first school in the mainland, I was more of a general music teacher. In the second school, it was going back to band, which is something really at my heart. And then during that time, which I think is what Jacqueline is kind of referring to, is in my second year at NCPA, I became co-chair of the department. It was an experience because it was a very established department. Most of the teachers in the performing arts department had been there. They were in their fifth or sixth year when I was co-chairing, and it was like, let's find out what happens. At least they didn't just sort of throw me in as the sole chair of being like, I'm the new kid on the block, and now I'm telling you guys what to do. It's like, you guys know this better than I do. But that has then also kind of happened at AISG, the school I've just started at this year, where I received the offer and signed the contract as a secondary music teacher, teaching diploma years, DP music and band. And then they advertised saying, we're looking for PLC, professional learning communities, PLC leaders for the following departments. And VPA, visual performing arts, came up as one of them. Threw my hat in the ring thinking, yeah, right, like I'll get this. Again, new kid on the block, you've got other experienced teachers. And lo and behold, I got the position. So I came into my new school as head of department. I think in a sense, that attitude of like, well, you guys know this better than I do has really helped as well. I think I sort of spoke about that in my interview for the VPA PLCL role. And it's been really true to their word, where we have a great team in the visual performing arts department at AISG, and I feel it's very collaborative. You know, everyone's voices are heard, and we disagree. We disagree respectfully. We challenge each other, and we come to places that I, on my own, if I'd been coming and going, this is what we're going to do, wouldn't necessarily be where we went. And so that, I hope, is the result of some true collaboration and sharing the leadership more than just pushing my own, what I think is best.
Let's talk a little bit about the differences you've noticed of teaching back home, teaching back in Australia, and teaching overseas. I think a lot of our listeners would be curious to hear, day to day, what are some differences you noticed, and then just big picture stuff as well.
I saw our list of questions, and this was on there, and I was thinking about that a lot, because all of those places are so different, and there's so many different factors to that. The schools I've been at are so different. There were times where I felt that being overseas, I had a lot more support, and there were times that being overseas, I had less support. Australia has quite a strong teachers union, and there's nothing like that. The closest thing we have to that would probably be search associates, would probably be, these recruitment agencies that when contracts don't go the way they do, we don't have as much of a support. So there's those aspects of it. And then it also depends on, I've worked at schools where the arts are the forefront of what's happening. I've worked at schools where the arts are more, a supplementary thing or a balance of these. That was in Australia. It felt like for me, one of the reasons I left was that the arts aren't often supported, and so to have that mix in international teaching has been interesting as well. And then the cultural side of it as well, of course. I think that's to be expected. I deliberately, friends of mine back in Australia often ask, well, would you ever consider Europe? And I'm like, parts of Europe are still quite similar to Australia. Not that having said that without having been there, I prefer, I prefer something that's as different as is feasible or safe.
Yeah, and you can't get quite more different than China from Australia. I think sometimes I surprised myself by staying. Gosh, I think I was there 3 years in total in China, and in two different cities. And some of the biggest culture shock I've ever gone through in my 20-year career overseas was in China, just from the day to day, purchasing of well, I had one supermarket I could go to without blocking my nose, kind of thing,
Yep.
because sometimes the smells would just be overwhelming. And so I went to like a shishi supermarket that was a little bit more like Western supermarkets then. wet markets and things like
Hmm.
that. The
Hmm.
smells and the visual as
Hmm.
well was overwhelming sometimes.
Jacqueline, did you have the experience where each time you felt like you kind of had a good grasp of China, you would have something new happen and just be like, oh, well, nope, we're back to square one again. Okay. Was that how you felt
Just when
about
I
it then?
started to think I got a handle on this
Hmm.
language, and
Hmm.
then somebody would ask me something, and I'm like, what are you asking me? What? So
Hmm.
things like language based, yeah, for
Hmm.
sure. And I don't know if you remember this, but we would talk about good China days and bad China days. And
That's true.
there were days where we were just like, okay, I'm in a bad China day.
Hmm.
I can't get out of this funk. And then there were
Hmm.
days where you were just like, oh my gosh, it's a blue sky, there's
Hmm.
sun, like I can, feel my pores getting all this vitamin D and breathing really well. And you would have like these awesome days, and obviously more good days than bad, because I think that's why we stay.
Yep, yep. I think as well, it's interesting you mentioned that because something else that I reflect on in my time in China is that I've been in different international communities while there. The school that Jacqueline and I worked at together, and Greg, I'd be curious, are you doing, are you like on a compound?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jacqueline and I were at the school that we were first at together. We all lived in pretty much the same apartment complex. But then my second school, I decided to because it was still in the same area. I decided, oh, I'll find my own apartment. But all the other teachers were still in similar apartment complexes. And now my third school in China, similar. I found my own apartment again, and all the other teachers are mainly living in another area. And so I think I felt more supported at the school that Jacqueline and I worked at because you would, you'd be walking home or you'd be doing something nearby and you'd bump into each other and be like, hey, how's it going? Or you'd stop and have a drink at the pub and decompress and share your bad China or good China days. Whereas when you're a bit more on your own, I don't know if I would have survived China as much as I did, especially during COVID, if I'd started with that more isolated kind of feeling.
And you've been in this for a long time, so you've seen different kinds of schools and how they handle housing. When you're talking about specifically living, I'll share with you a little bit of my first year teaching overseas was in Honduras, and they didn't have us all like on a compound or anything, but they did have an apartment complex and a couple different apartment complexes. So they put 3 or 4 different apartments together, they rent it out, and then they would give us that housing as included in the contract. But what was weird is that, like, I had a roommate for the first time. I was 30 years old. I had this roommate and I
Yep.
hated him. We didn't get along. I mean, it was really bad. Anyway, I won't even mention that story, but we got there and we got to know each other. We're like borrowing pots and pans. It's like, hey, I'm
Hmm.
making spaghetti tonight. Can I borrow your big pan? Because nobody had any kind of pots and pans
Hmm.
with them. And
Oh,
it
wow.
was not one of those countries where we made a lot of money at the time. We made very little, but we had a lot of fun just going out for a drink every night or going for dinner.
Hmm.
And we always did things together. And
Hmm.
actually, in San Pedro Sula at that school, you have to stick together as gringos because you're visitors there and you're targets. It's not an easy way to live. I loved it. I stayed for 3 years, but we had to stay together because it was a little bit more of a dangerous city, like living in Chicago or downtown New York. It's like, safety in numbers, like gazelle or something like that. Otherwise the cheetah will get you. I like what you pointed out though, is that every school is different according to their housing. So you might get, whether it's included, and that's a whole nother story, but whether you're living alone in an apartment or you're living with a bunch of other people or a family's right next door that you teach with. And there's good and there's bad too, right?
I was just going to say, my first international school was the boarding school where the teachers were living on campus, and we were
Oh.
a solid 20 minutes or more out of town, and it was exactly Greg, like what you were talking about. You'd all go to the pub together, or you would, oh hey, I found this little place down the road here, or because we were out in the sticks, we were literally out in the
Yeah,
jungle.
boarding school
So
is
that
a
was
different story altogether because then you're living with students and maybe you're even in charge. When I was living in Switzerland, I worked at Tassus and I was in charge of middle school in dorms, but then I was teaching elementary. So it was it's very dynamic, and we need to have an episode just on boarding schools, right? But
there you go.
wow, every
Yeah.
school is different with their housing, and there's not one way to like lump
Mhm.
all these in. You can't pigeonhole any of these schools. We can find some things that are alike.
And you can't say that one way works, because we're all different people. You know, we just recently had Marcos on, who was talking about coach school, where I lived on campus for 8 years. I was extremely happy living outside the city for 8 years in that goldfish bowl. And he couldn't get off soon enough. Like, get me out of here, 2 years. And then he went into the city. It can't fit for everyone. And I think, Peter, what do you prefer? With all your experience, what have you noticed that you like the best?
I mean, I've seen the same thing. Macau was not for everyone. There were people that did it was a 1 year contract every year. So some people did 1 year and were out. Some people did, well, I was there for 5. I've got friends that are still there that have retired there. What do I prefer? Like I said, like I try to look at the school now. I think like what Greg was alluding to earlier, that you've got to know, and I think it's what I've learned the most. I spent some time on the International Teachers subreddit, which, if for those of your listeners that are interested in finding new ways to research schools, it's a very active community. There's a lot of good information there. It's just r/international teachers. And, the thing that I think for new people is to realize that it's not just, oh, I want to go to this country or I want to go to this city. You're choosing a school too, and that's probably where you're going to spend most of your time. And every school is so different. When you asked about what the biggest difference has been from teaching in Australia to going overseas, it's that you can no longer guarantee the curriculums are different, the buildings are different, the people, there's so many moving parts to that. Whereas in Australia, in the public system, I'm not sure about where for the countries where you guys are from, but you could guarantee certain things. You knew that they were all doing the same curriculum. You knew that you were mostly teaching local students. You knew that funding would be how it is. The building would be this old. Like, there were certain givens that you could assume. You can't do that overseas.
And the only thing you can guarantee in international is that every position, every country you're in, every school you're in, it's going to be different. And that's why those interview questions are going to be, so important, which you learn to ask the questions that are important to you. Like when I go into an interview for a new school, I say, what's the housing situation like? Do I have to have a roommate? Are they assigned? Is it a hovel? Is it in an apartment? Is it in a compound? All of those questions come up on your second or third interview. And as experienced teachers, we know that. But it's very interesting because all of my experiences, I think I've been at 7 different schools now with 7 different kinds of apartments, right? And they each have their own little story, just like you're saying. And it's right now I have such this terrible little apartment, but I don't even want to spend time there. That's okay because I love my job. And me personally, I can live anywhere as long as I love what I'm doing every day because I spend more time at work than I spend in my apartment anyway, right? It's a great conversation to talk about housing and talk about school, what the school's like to fit in. All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all 4 of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITPXpats. That's with an S. ITPXpats is our handle.
All right, and thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners, and though we're not monetized, we are here for you, and we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show. Can I ask a few questions about music, though? Can we switch over to music, JP?
All right, let me change gears here. Let's see.
No, I just wanted to ask you, the schools that you're in, do they provide, you mentioned band, so do they provide instruments? Do they have band instruments for the kids?
To come back, I guess, full circle, it really depends on how established the program or the school is. When I was in three of the schools that I was in, the programs were becoming established, were kind of starting off. It was those discussions with the owners or the heads of school, and like, well, what do you want the students to do? Or you guys know the students better. What's going to work the best for them? Do we have parents that are going to go out and buy their own instruments? Do we need to supplement it with instruments? Okay, how much money are you willing to spend? The more established schools and more established programs made sure they had enough instruments to, at least in their first year, every student was guaranteed that they had access to an instrument.
With any band program has to start with fourth grade recorders, right? Because I can't get away from them. Every school has fourth grade recorders. I don't know. They have direct delivery to schools with recorders for kids.
But the sad thing with recorders, Greg, is that they're a beautiful instrument when they're played well. I worked with a choir teacher at NCPA there who loved recorder music. He'd put on these recordings and it'd be like, oh, that's beautiful. Oh, that's beautiful. Why doesn't it sound like that with fourth graders? Oh, yeah, because they just go and try and put as much air through the instrument as possible.
Well, I'm excited to hear you're our third or fourth music international teacher to be on the show. And I love it because talking with other music international teachers, you do have a gathering, you have support groups, you have PLCs. And I wanted to ask you, have you ever heard, you might be a member of the Music Teachers in International Schools group. There's a website for it, MTIIS, I believe. I never expected to go to an international school anywhere in the world when I first started out and see a band concert. I mean, I didn't expect it to be like one of our U.S. schools where you go to have a band concert and then you have a Christmas concert. Even in countries that don't have Christmas, they have like a band concert around the holiday, the winter season. Is that what you're doing? You're like a band teacher and you're doing band for high school, middle school, elementary, whatever. That's what it is, right?
More or less. I mean, you've hit on a really interesting point, Greg, because I've had people comment to me like, oh, it was so nice to go to a band concert, or it was so nice to hear Christmas music. Like it reminds them of home. I think that it's something that's important for the teaching community, but also it depends on, three of the schools that I've taught at rather have all been local students or predominantly local students. So you're right, like being aware of the role that band is playing, and especially you've touched on, Greg, that it's a piece of like US culture. But for me as an Aussie, I just grew up playing in band and I just think it's really cool. And I want everyone to experience that. And so understanding and finding that kind of intersection of it's a US culture thing, but making it culturally appropriate and important to students in other countries is just it's something that when I was in Australia, again, I would have never thought of that. Actually, no, I would have thought of it a little bit because there is a growing and strong movement toward like making sure that Australian composers are represented. I'm doing a piece of music, or I'm teaching a piece of music at the moment, which is actually it's a female Australian composer, and she is written about a musical retelling of music from the Aboriginal Dreamtime, the Australian Indigenous people's Dreamtime, and so ways to try and make sure that even in a US focused vehicle like band, that multiple cultures are being represented. Now, as a white Aussie, I don't know if I can do that, but I'm going to try my best. And if I get it wrong sometimes, I'm going to learn from that. Like, I think that's, even in international schooling in general, it's actually what I love about my current school is that I feel supported. I really get pushed to challenge myself, but that it's okay to fail forward, I think is a term that has come up a few times, where it's like, try something, and if it doesn't work, reflect and be like, well, why didn't it work? What can I do better next time?
So you're influencing your students, hopefully, with a variety of different music pieces. You're trying to get them to try out what what their local Chinese music in their region of China might be, and you might pick up some jazz from America, or you might pick up something else, huh?
Mm-hmm.
It's so important that we do that as teachers, but even more through the arts. Art teachers and music teachers and the PE teachers, all of the specialists have to really in these schools, we really have to go even more towards that international, not
Hmm.
just for International Week like we did in the States,
Yeah, right.
It's more
Yeah.
like, let's go and explore all the time throughout the year. We're going to try different varieties. That's fun. Do you do also vocal music? Are you a band teacher, or are you music like all around?
My first year back in Australia, I actually got together with the deputy principal at the time, and we ran elementary choir together, and it was fun, but it was interesting because there are so many concepts that do overlap, and so it's the sort of thing where I'm like, I can do that. Should I be doing it? Probably not. But I do
No,
like.
we all have preferences, right? We all have preferences.
But I do teach diploma program music, which is the higher level of or the last 2 years rather of the IB music program, which is very like it's whatever instrument, whatever voice, whatever you're doing, come on in and let's if you're into music and want to talk about music and want to think about music, you can take DP music, but no, other than that, it's all band, which is I love that I teach a subject that it's not just talking about it or reading about it. You're doing the thing, And yeah, I just there's been so many times. One time in particular that really stuck out to me was my last concert with students in Macau, and the students were good enough that I got to just like I was conducting, and I could just be like, I literally remember looking up in the auditorium and being like, this is so cool. Like word that I can't say in the middle. It was just
like walk away, and it's like that Bugs Bunny cartoon where he's got the opera guy and he leaves his glove up there and it's hovering, and he walks away and orders a pair of earmuffs. Sorry,
Yep.
I went way off on the. See, music is amazing, and you got me going on the music. So let me share something with you, Peter. And I want to shout out to another friend of mine. If you don't know Brian White, he's based out of, now he's teaching in Milan at the American School of Milan. He was here with me in the desert. I wanted to share this story with you because for my entire life, music is important. And I think all teachers should love that. I even played the recorder for my fourth graders and threw them all like, oh my God, I can't believe, mister, you're playing the recorder. Oh my God, you know how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then I whipped out a couple of jazzy songs. But here's my little story. I never expected, and I never had the opportunity to play any of the musical instruments that were at schools that I've taught in, and never had a pickup band. Nobody ever said, hey, join this. We're putting together a group.
Mm-hmm.
When I came to the desert, and this is a very well-established school that has a lot of instruments, and I went from the elementary school. We went one night to this British compound, and they had this jazz band playing, and they were playing 40s and 50s and Frank Sinatra. They had like a little quartet of saxophones as I walked in. Half the people in the band were from my school. They were teachers.
Wow.
And the second grade teacher says to me, Greg, you need to join us. And I said, no way. I haven't played sax in like 30 years. Like literally 30 years ago, I played in college, first year, and high school. Well, it turns out that for the next 6 years until COVID, right before COVID, we broke up, but it was like this. It's like the Commitments movie, right? We had this band, we put them together like the Blues Brothers were on a mission from God.
There you go. Getting the band back together.
Yeah, a 30-piece band for jazz with 2 singers, and we had 30-piece band, and we were amazing. And you can find us on YouTube, the Davron Big Band. It's amazing. We put on a concert at the end of those 6 years before COVID came up. We had 1,000 seats filled one night on a stage, and it was just crazy awesome. And then we played in the desert the next morning, which is a whole nother story. But I guess my point is that I finally found a school that has a band put together for the staff outside of school for things to do. And I've always met people that have little pickup bands, but never like a 30-piece jazz band.
A proper big band, a proper
jazz.
yep.
Anyway, thank you for letting me go down memory lane there for a second. It's still the greatest thing I've ever done overseas.
But it's exactly what you've touched on. Such a great point is that music means different things to different people, and the fact that you got to experience that because at some point you were a fourth grader with a recorder, or second grader, or I don't know, that,
or 18.
that got you, or 18, even better, that got you you know, your way of appreciating music is different to mine, is different to Jacqueline's, is different to. But I think everyone has that inside them, you know, and however that gets.
Not on with us right now is Kent, and Kent, Jacqueline will back me up on this. Kent plays the flute. He's taking flute lessons, or he was. I think she dropped him now, but he had a Canadian woman that was teaching him online with flute just to learn it. And he's learning piano. And both of us are learning all these new instruments because we're learning how to, I don't know, I'm learning how to read bass clef. You know, I always played on the melody instrument. But wow, I mean, every school you go to, when they have a choir concert, I just about cry. I just love it. I remember being in Egypt, and I actually joined a choir in Egypt, and we sang Karl Orff, right?
Oh,
Carmina
wow.
Burana. I can't even say that word, but it was wild, right? Dun 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 dun. Anyway, jump in anytime, JP. I don't know if you're musical or not. Hey, it's the music hour on the ITP.
I am, and Peter and I connected way back when he was still online, and we were texting each other back and forth. We connected through an Aussie duo that I found on YouTube and absolutely loved. Two set
and you play tuba. And you play tuba?
I do not. I play my voice. I'm a
she
voice.
sings the bass, though. It's a mean bass line. No.
Singer. And so we would talk about two-set violin. And so was the photo you sent to me of two-set violin, because he said, oh, you mean these guys? And then he goes and he sends me a selfie or a photo taken with my heroes of YouTube. Was that in Brisbane?
Yep, that was in Queen Street Mall in Brisbane on a Christmas trip back to Australia. And I was like, this is Jacqueline, this is how little of a fan I was at this point. I was like, I didn't even know their names. So I just saw them. I was like, two-set violin. And they were like, huh? And I'm like, I'm really sorry. I'm a band teacher in Macau, and my students are going to love that I got to see you. And can we take a selfie? And we both happened to go, we all went to the same college, just at different times. And I think you know this already, Jacqueline, a very good friend of mine who's been a friend of mine for about 20 years actually played with Brett and Eddie two-set violin before they had a YouTube channel, before they were anything. They played in, like, I think it was like Queensland Youth Orchestra together, and she knew, like, they were talking about this idea to start a YouTube channel. And yeah, it's a small world, you know.
So it's a YouTube channel with like two violins.
Well, Greg, so what got me into it was because I had another musical friend, Rebecca, in the Middle East, who's a clarinet teacher. And she shared with me a YouTube video, just I think it was violin charades. So like they played charades on their violin, and they had to guess each other's either composer or the piece or the country, which is really hilarious. Like when they play a little thing of music, and then you have to guess, oh, that's China, or oh, that's Italy. And you know, it's all very stereotypical music. But it got me going on this channel thinking, this is hilarious, and it's entertaining, and it's educational. And I just feel like, I think I've been watching them for 4 or 5 years. I just feel like my musical education has gone through the roof just watching that channel. So they do a little bit of everything. I would really recommend it to our listeners. YouTubers, two-set violin, TWOSET violin. I even bought a t-shirt, and I have one of their decals on my fridge, just because I feel like they bring music to the layperson. Like I'm not a musician, and I'm not somebody that studied music other than just what was required and even not even in high school. Actually, it was required in middle school. Was the last time I took the flute. But I found that they speak to the general person out there. And so that's how Peter and I kind of started talking and connecting, because I was asking him about the pieces that I was learning about. Like, what did you think of Rachmaninoff? Did you ever play him when you were studying? And
I'm going to have to watch that YouTube channel. Check it out, right? Two violins. I'll check that out.
Two-set violin.
Two-set violins, because if you both like it, I think I'll have to learn a little bit. But I tell you one thing, I learned music by listening to Spinal Tap. And there's also 2 movies. And if you haven't learned about music, it's really a way to learn about music. It's an iconic movie. I saw them in concert in Milwaukee back in the 90s. But Spinal Tap, those of you listeners out there, you want to learn music, it's a serious form of music and rock loud music.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I'd throw that out there. Since you shared something with me about music, I will share that with you.
Well, I was thinking as well because you've touched on Two Set and Spinal Tap, and Greg mentioned the music teachers in international schools group, and they also have a podcast for other music teachers or musicians that are listening. For international schools, there's also AMI, the Association for Music in International Schools, and they're very active. They often run honor ensembles. They do music teachers conference, music educators conference every year that alternates between 1 year Asia, 1 year Europe. And they do a lot of other online workshops. I did a workshop for MYP in ensembles this year, which was great. And it's what's fascinating about me. I can't speak so much to MTIIS, but for me at least, is it's very often music teachers supporting music teachers, and it's a great way to connect with others in the community. So that's
We'll have to put
my
that link
recommendation.
down with our notes. Yeah, that's
Sure.
mine was a total joke, but you guys are very serious about this.
No.
So we'll put your link down there for we do have music teachers that are listening and chiming in, and they'll get to meet.
Spinal Tap's a great thing to add, though, Greg. I loved that. I didn't know there was two movies. I only knew about one, so I'll be looking that up tonight.
Go looking up second. The second movie is the concert I went to. Actually, it was fantastic. But you have to have fun with this, right? Hey, listen. I forgot what I was going to ask. I think we're getting towards about an hour, and we do have a couple questions for the ITP. I was wondering, do you take musical instruments with you from country to country? Because
I
my
don't.
first question is, what are three things that you take with you to each country?
I mean, sorry, I don't take. I mean, I take my own instruments. I thought you were wondering if I like collected each country's musical instrument.
I'll be more clear. Do you take your specific instruments, and if you do, what are the three things you need with you in every country?
I do take my, especially my trumpet and my granddad's trombone. Are the two, like, I have to make sure that they come with me. When I first left Macau, I'd stored a few instruments at a friend's place, thinking I can come back and get these another time, and then COVID. But the three things that I need in every country, would be my instruments. I need to have some kind of gym membership or somewhere to exercise. That was one of my three. And then the third thing was something else other than, music, going to the gym, is gaming. I need to take my laptop with me. I need to be able to decompress after school and, take it easy. And that's
aliens, yeah.
Well, yeah, it is. That one, pretty much. So that would be my three. My instruments.
Warcraft.
Yeah. No, Jacqueline, no more. Oh, gosh. I try not to.
So, Peter, have you had a run-in with the law in all your travels? Can you tell us a police story?
I can. Well, I was going to go with, because I believe the other option is like an immigration kind of story. Is that close enough? Because the police story I want to tell, I probably can't, and Jacqueline knows the one I might be referring to. But at one stage, I spent time doing like No Shave November, and then I decided to extend that into like December, January, and I'd grown this nice sort of 3-month beard, and I was like, I think this looks pretty cool, no worries, and ended up doing a border crossing into Macau where I got out my passport, and they looked at my passport, they looked at me, they looked at my passport, and I kind of ran my hands through my beard, and I'm like, is this the problem? Because my passport photo, of course, doesn't have a beard on it. And so immigration were like, do you have more ID? And I went, well, and I pulled out my Queensland driver's license, which also didn't have a beard on the photo. I pulled out my school ID, which also didn't have a beard on the photo. So I'm going like, So fortunately,
because I have Sharpie. Can we just Sharpie in a beard?
Fortunately, it was just, it's a land crossing. You literally walk across the border from Zhuhai to Macau. And so I was like, look, if they're not going to let me through, I can just go back to Guangzhou, no problem. But I was like, man, if this was like flying into Thailand or flying somewhere else and they did the same thing. So sadly, when I got back to Guangzhou, the beard had to go. I was very.
Did they let
my mom
you
was
in?
a bit
That's
more
my
happy.
question. Did they
What's
let
that?
you
They
in
didn't let
finally?
you
They
in.
did. They did let me in. They did
Did they
let
give
me
you a
in.
razor and say, if you want to get in here, let's go?
Well, that might have been the thing of like, look, let me go shave and I'll come back. Maybe that would have been the way. That's my kind of run in where I was like, come on, really? We got through.
Those are the stories we love, though. You know, it's great. I mean, you gotta have stories of some sort that you can share. We don't want to have to edit them later out because, you know. But thank you for sharing that story. I love it.
Yeah, I wanted to know if Peter has some tips for the person that's thinking of making that jump overseas and just not sure. What could you tip the scale for them?
You know, it's a very personal decision, and kind of know the reason that you're doing or reasons that you're doing it. I see, especially on the subreddit that I mentioned, a lot of teachers asking those sorts of questions like, how do I get into this, or should I? What should I ask? You know, what should I be looking for? What school? And it's like, well, that's such a personal thing. And so some of it is like you won't know until you get there. And even the opposite, you might try something that's a bit out of your comfort zone and actually like it. Macau was never on my radar. It wasn't somewhere that I was going, I need to go to Macau. And even Chiang Mai in Thailand, you know, wasn't what I was necessarily aiming for, but I love it. So that mix of searching in yourself, what do you want to get out of it? But also maybe the school that isn't the best fit school on paper actually is the right fit for you, potentially. And then the other thing I'd just add a little bit more pragmatically is reach out to the teachers that are at schools already. I know that's something I haven't done enough, and I see that often given as advice that can be helpful.
Yeah, if you can find them on LinkedIn or on Facebook and reach out and just say, hey, I potentially like to come to your school. Can we have a chat? I think a lot of international teachers are very open to sharing in messages.
Or even if you're interviewing with a school, just say, hey, can you connect me with, you know, someone who's there now, even if it's a person leaving. A lot of schools are open to that, I think.
Those are beautiful words of wisdom. I love it. Well, I I don't know where to go. Are you going to play some music for us before we get off the air?
I'm in my hotel, so I don't know. I didn't.
Oh, you didn't
don't
bring
have
the
any
banjo
instrument.
with you. Oh,
What do you, I can
man.
like tap away on a water bottle.
Yeah.
Well, hang on.
thank you.
Hang on. Now, here we go. Ready?
Oh,
Ready?
oh, here we go. Something.
Ooh. Wait, do you have perfect pitch? Can you tell me what note that is?
I do
It's
not
the
have
water
perfect
bottle
pitch.
pitch.
It's the
I
water
don't
bottle.
either.
The W. There you go.
Well, I tell you, it's been a lot of fun to talk with you about music and have a great time in China right now where you're at. I hope that you come back at some point with our show and interview with us again, because I'm sure you're going to be in the international for quite a while. I don't expect you to go back to Australia after having so much fun in these countries, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Anytime. It's been a great chat. Yeah. I can't believe typical chats with Jacqueline. It's like that was an hour already. So it felt like that. But with Greg listening in as well and talking about music, it was great to compare notes and notes and share our experiences.
Compare notes.
All right. So anyway, this is Greg signing off. Thank you very much, Peter Pagett from China and logging in from Chiang Mai, and the laughing JP Mint. Have a very musical time. And in the time before our next podcast, listeners, be careful if you're going across a border. Make sure you don't have a beard if you don't have one in your ID. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next holiday.
Yay!
Whatever that